Okay, I don't know why this looks so blurry. All right, those bow ties. Look, let me just say, this is probably going to be one of the most ignorant conversations I'm gonna have. And you're gonna excuse the hair. You know, I came in and it was rain, and now I got a whole puff situation. Puff the magic dragon. So it is what it is. So look, let me tell you about this conversation I had. I was talking about basically the human element with um, several different men, and I had recalled a conversation I had about, I don't know if it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, with two different men. And I'm going to bring up their race. They were black men. All these conversations that I had from a couple years ago were black men. And then I had this same conversation with men today. But we were talking about the human element. And I don't know why I was talking about it. I think I was thinking about just in general what happens when there's a competition for resources. And so basically, I recalled a conversation that I had several years ago regarding what would what is your priority if you are in a situation where there's a competition for resources and you're stranded someplace, right? Whether it's a plane crash, it could be, I don't know, you're dropped off in the jungle, you whatever it is. What is your first thing? You're starting from scratch. I was talking about how men and women are probably going to think about things differently. And I'm like, well, what is the first thing you think about? So ultimately, everyone, we all pretty much came to the same conclusion. I basically said, my first thought is securing potable water, because you cannot survive without potable water. However, you can survive without shelter, and you can survive without food. Now, it won't be long term, but your immediate need is potable water. So I said you would need water, you need shelter, and then you would need food. And I think pretty much in that order. Okay. And now the shelter protects you from the elements. Maybe it protects you from some wild animals, whatever. The sun, you know. But ultimately, shelter is not number one, in my opinion. I think potable water. Or it depends on if you know that within a day you're going to have water, you would probably try to secure shelter. But if this man and woman, we both need those same things. Those things are important. I said, now, after you secure those things, what is next? So it had me thinking about something I had seen on TV, or maybe I had read something. And I said, it's going to be different if it's just one man, one woman. But what happens if there's 10 or 50 or whatever? The point is, I said, what do you think about next? And one of the things that I was saying was, when you're put into these environments, if it's just one man, one woman, there's no need to create like society, right? Because it's just you and that one other person. But now, when you are 20 people, 50 people, whatever, equal men, equal women. So now what are you thinking about? So what I was saying was, basically, at what point, when you have secured all of your water, your shelter, and your food, at what point do you start organizing yourself in terms of society, like some sort of rules, or that type of thing? And every single man said to me, nobody cares. I was like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean you don't care? I said, you have to have rules for existing, right? Especially if resources are slim. So anyway, I posed this question to a couple people because we were talking about, nobody was doing work. So we were talking about just that whole human element. Like, at what point do you start organizing yourself? And, some of it I was talking about, like Survivor, right? At what point do you start to move off into these little factions? I like Survivor. But so I was talking about, like, at what point do you start to organize yourself? Because ultimately what you're going to do is you're going to really be assigning value. Like, what are you capable of doing? Maybe you can secure fire. That brings in a whole other level of, like, if you have this skill, right? What does this mean? And at what point do you start to do that? Does everyone get trained on doing that sort of thing? Or do you just have, I don't know, designated roles? 100% of the men said, as soon as you start securing your water, your shelter, and your food, you're looking to dominate. And I was like, they're like, if you're one on one, they're like, there's no retribution if you're talking about man versus woman. Now, my idiot self was thinking about men and women are both going to need each other, right? Because you're going to seek comfort or whatever. But I'm not thinking of that in right away. But anyway, I heard 1 day, 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, and approximately 3 weeks to a month. They're talking about, you know what? They're like, if it's just a one man, one woman, they're like, really quickly, that's where your mind is going. And I'm like, I don't think most women are thinking that. And they went on and on and on and on. It had all these different reasons. And I was like, in my mind, I'm thinking your next thing is, if it's just one on one, you're thinking in terms of like communication, how to get out of this situation. And they're like, well, you're always thinking that. But if you've secured your immediate needs, and if there's no possibility that you know of anytime soon of getting off the island or out of the jungle or whatever, you start looking at domination. And I was like, this is the craziest conversation. So I'm thinking, like, at what point do we start to naturally organize and do these other things? They're thinking in terms of domination. So one of the guys said, the one who said 5 days, he said, hey, that's really loud. So can you do me a favor and close your door? So one of the guys said, hold on a second, let me just. All right, I had to fuss at my college student. So one of the things that came out of this conversation was, what he said was, men are naturally going to want to dominate or hunt or something like that. And so hunting and domination does not look like clubbing you over the head, right? But what he said was, if you're dealing with 5 or 10 men or women, if you have 5 or 10 men and you have 5 or 10 women, he said men are going to start looking to dominate each other first. Because he's like, now it's kind of like it's too many men, right? So it's not so much taking each other out. It's more along the lines of who's more skilled, who's the most dominant person, right? So I was like, wait a second. He's like, that's what they're thinking of. They're not thinking in terms of the way you're thinking really nicely about organizing as a society with laws and stuff. They're looking to establish a hierarchy in terms of dominance. They're always going to want to do this. They're like, you're thinking in terms of securing your needs first, and then there's this need to dominate. And I said, well, I was just sitting there like, clearly we think completely different, because here I am thinking, if it's man versus woman, you're going to want to come together. You're going to want to secure food, shelter, water, and all those other things. They're thinking once those things are secured, immediate domination. Now, it doesn't look like being clubbed over the head. So here I am having this ignorant conversation. I'm like, so clearly men are from, was it Mars, and women are from Venus, or whatever that saying is? Because ultimately, in my mind, I'm like, you want to do what's good for everyone. And they're like, most men are going to be like, okay, you want protection? I'm like, well, what if a woman is not looking for protection that soon off, right? They're like, basically what they were saying is, they'll just stop providing resources. They'll withhold resources, and you will comply. And I'm sitting here like, this is so stupid to me. And I'm like, apparently I live on an island literally by myself in my mind. Because ultimately their thing is, if you have 10 men or 20 men, then what you're going to probably do is look to dominate the men. Men are going to look to establish a pecking order first. So maybe if you're the best at making a fire or something, you're going to want to go ahead and do that. And it's going to establish you as someone with who's valued, who has a skill. And everyone else, it's like, do you even share that skill? I was like, holy cow. They're like, I don't know if that skill gets shared. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, when you have such few numbers, you have to share skills. They were like, maybe not in the beginning. You want to make yourself as the most valued, and you're almost like gaining, it's like some sort of alliance. And then, of course, the one guy said, the larger the number of the people, the more easier it is to form a society. Hold on a second. Okay, I'm getting ready to say something ignorant to my son here because he's clearly got his TV up so loud. Okay, sorry. I continue. I digress. So, ultimately, what I have found was they said that within days, if it's just men and women, like a small group, they're looking to dominate in the first few days. And it doesn't look like being clubbed over the head, all right? It's kind of like, hey, so what's up? And I'm like, ew. And they were saying, like, you like to think that you're not going to do that, but you're almost like creating some sort of dependency. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, this is the dumbest conversation. I guess for me, I was thinking in terms of like the social hierarchy. And I guess that is part of a social hierarchy. But ultimately, I was thinking in terms of like when you watch things like a Survivor or something like that, the first thing you want to do is get water, your shelter, and hopefully fire. But later, I mean, like ultimately, you're going to need food, but you need water and you need shelter. And in the process of doing that, right, that's when all the other social things come into play. Now, granted, these people are on television, so they're not looking to dominate each other physically. You know what I mean? I brought up Naked and Afraid, and the person I was talking to was like, it's a TV show. So, yeah, they're not going to do that. So, after talking to several people and these were all black men, I was like, I don't know if it's just a cultural thing or what. So I asked the white guy something like this, and he was more along the lines of like, well, maybe I'm just. And he's like, no, I don't think that that's what's going to happen. He was like, after you secure all your basic needs, I can see people wanting to. I gave the answers to what several men said, and he said, I can see possibly like men wanting to, you know, hey, it's all about my survival. I'm like, well, I don't think people want to take each other out if it's just so small numbers. He was like, I can possibly see that, but I don't know about dominating women. I was like, I was thinking in terms of how far we've come as humans. And I'm like, I was just so shocked. And he was like, I don't know about that. So my question to you after all of this, are we just crazy as black people? Or was that white guy not telling the truth? Because ultimately, I was thinking from a social standpoint, like Naked and Afraid. I said, look, if you watch Naked and Afraid, the men and women that go on that show, they're not out there looking at it. Well, not that we can see on camera. If anything, they're getting on each other's nerves. And the one guy's like, that's a TV show. I'm like, but they're still out there naked and afraid. You know, they've got to try to, get food and all that stuff. The one guy, I said, well, what if the woman doesn't need you for securing water and food? I'm like, she has hers and you have yours. And he's like, what makes you think you have yours? You can't stop me. You cannot stop me. I'm like, well, I actually can. They're like, generally speaking, you're not going to be able to stop me. Not that I'm planning on taking something, but what he's saying is if there's no retribution, there's nothing that's really stopping that. Now, most men would generally try to partner, but if you don't get on board with partnering, if they want to, you can't stop them from anything. And I was like, well, then that's not really a willing partner. That's forced compliance. And he's like, yeah. Anyway, my question is, am I just like a ding dong thinking that like we would get together as humans and try to figure out some sort of solution and that comfort would come much later, right? Like, I don't think the average, well, maybe I'm wrong. The average woman is not thinking like I'm seeking intimacy, comfort that soon. But many men were like, yes, we are, as soon as possible. And I was like, that's not true. I'm like, everything is so heightened. They were like, days, you got days. Anyway, so let me know what your thoughts are, because apparently I just live in my own little perfect little bubble. That's all I've got. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are.